I think what we've found, I mean, I think that there has been some shift where women in journalism. So there's definitely been a shift towards broader gender diversity. But I was just reading Jane Martinson's column, actually. She wrote just after the Women in Journalism research came out last year. And she said that when they first did the research in 2012 about female bylines, 79% of all bylines on the front pages were male. And when we redid it last year, it's now 75%. So that's not a wonderful shift in a 10-year period. And I'm afraid when it comes to broader diversity, our findings were really bad. So in 2016, Reuters and City University did a survey, and they found that 94% of all journalists were white. And when we did our study last year, we did a snapshot of what was going on in newsrooms, and we counted the numbers of different kinds of people on the front making the front page. So the writers who were on the front page, there wasn't a single Black journalist who had a front page byline in the 10 days that we looked at. And on TV, it definitely looks a bit better. So about 30% of presenters now are BAME, but when you dig under the surface, it's only around 10% of reporters. So there's definitely some kind of, massaging of the figures. And of course, as you go up the chain, I mean, the number of BAME or Black editors, vanishingly small. And the other depressing thing was when we went to a lot of the different news groups, we went to all the managing editors and asked them what their plan was or if they had any targets. And the majority of them didn't come back to us, with two noticeable exceptions. Reach, run by our very own Alison Phillips, has a big kind of program around all of this. And the Financial Times are also really putting in some proper targets. Roula Khalaf gave us an interview in this same conversation slot, and she talked about actually putting in specific targets for representation within the newsroom. So I wanted to kind of open up with you a discussion about why that matters.
Oh my goodness, well, of course it matters. If we don't see ourselves represented within the publications that we read or the programs that we watch, the choice that is available to us now means that we can very easily just drift away from the cornerstones of what is British journalism. We can move away from those areas because actually we're being represented in other ways. That's part of the reason I know it doesn't exist in the form that it used to, but the Huffington Post was very, very good at that. My cousin Nadine White, there's a reason why she's a first race correspondent at the Independent, because the work that she was doing at the Huffington Post was incredible and immediately impactful. And in a very short space of time, her name was being spoken all over the place because she was doing incredible work. And it's a bit like, well, why was that not happening before? The Dean I'm hugely proud of. And there are so many other journalists who want to tell the stories that she is telling, who haven't been able to tell those stories because apparently nobody's interested. And apparently nobody wants to read about it. And actually people only want to read about certain stories and want to ignore others. And the fact of the matter is that's simply not true. And all that happens is you'll have a whole generation of news consumers who will quite simply go elsewhere. And I want to be a journalist because I want to tell stories. I want to tell those stories. There wasn't the internet when I decided to be a journalist. The only way you could figure out what else was happening in the world was by listening to a radio program, turning on Trevor, reading a newspaper. That was the only way. And that has changed. And the industry hasn't necessarily changed at the pace it should have done, and are very much being left behind in so many different ways, because for whatever reason there is a refusal to adapt and change with the ebb and flow of everyday life.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And we put out as the title of this conversation on social media, why certain stories get chosen, and for me, the lack of representation completely warps the news agenda. And so the news agenda in many of our main publications is a very kind of upper middle class white agenda, because those are the people who are choosing the stories. I mean, just things like the number of stories that there have been about the Hampstead Heath ladies pond, for instance, in the national press. I mean, that's not because all those journalists out there, all the public out there are really interested in Hampstead ladies pond. It's because lots of lady journalists coming in the Hampstead Ladies Pond. Or it's the same thing about kind of, certain schools in London or kind of areas in London which suddenly make national news, which is completely rubbish. And then all the stories that never get told.
Oh, well, I mean, I spoke about this on Loose just a couple of weeks ago. I could not believe how far and wide the awful story of that young girl that was kidnapped in Australia and then found by police.
Yeah.
And yes, it's an awful story, but how many Indigenous Australians, children, go missing on a regular basis in Australia? I think out of, they represent a small proportion of the country, and yet 25% of Indigenous people go missing. Of those that go missing, 25% are Indigenous within Australia. And yet we hear nothing about that whatsoever. But, a blonde girl in Australia goes missing and is found, and it suddenly is in every single newspaper in the country here. And it's like, how are we still not seeing what is so blatantly obvious when it comes to how we deal with stories and the disproportionate way that certain stories are seen as important and certain stories apparently we just don't care about? I mean, how we're still perpetuating that is incredible to me.
Yeah, there's somebody on the chat here who's just said it's exactly the same thing here in England. And it's true. I mean, I remember, just think about the coverage of something like Madeleine McCann, as opposed to one of the first stories that I commissioned when I was editor of the Sunday Times magazine was I sent Christina Lamb out to Nigeria to find out what had happened to the Chibok girls, the 400 girls who were kidnapped in their school in northern Nigeria and had gone missing. And of course, that was a big deal for a while all the celebrities were holding up the thing saying, bring back our girls. But then it vanished. And actually, there were times when those girls could have been brought back and nobody cared about it. It completely went off the end of the news agenda. So I think that there's such a double standard here.
Yeah, and it's not that nobody cares. As you say, it's those gatekeepers who choose what goes into our publications. It's what they decide that they are interested in. And I think it has always been that way. Mm-hmm. I think that we have reached a point in time where that is just not acceptable. My brother is in his late 20s, and I don't think he has ever bought a physical paper, ever. He gets his news from a range of different, both domestic and international, sources. He's very well read, he's very intelligent, but just getting it from here isn't good enough for him, because he's getting a lot of the same stuff, but what he wants to get is the other stuff that doesn't seem to warrant the same kind of coverage here. And I love our industry. I don't want to lose our industry. What we do is important. What we do changes lives. The campaigns that many of our newspapers do, they really do change legislation. They change lives. They can turn things around in a heartbeat, because that is the power that they have. And I do not want to lose our industry. I do not want to lose the incredible work that happens with other sections within the industry. I don't want to lose that. So, and I don't think it's a big ask to ask them to open the doors to other people and to open the doors to other creative, highly talented people. I'd love it if, when you've got fights over who should be editors of newspapers, oh my goodness, I'd love it to be like, a working class kid from Lewisham who becomes an editor of a newspaper, and you've got all the newspapers fighting over who he's going to be editor of next. I'd love that, but I just can't foresee that happening anytime in the near future.
No, well, there certainly weren't too many working class kids from Lewisham being banded around as possible editors of the Daily Mail last week, were there?
No, and
different kinds of Etonian, I think, was what was being served up.
And I just think that I don't think any newspaper comes off well in that discussion at all, because it's down to seeing what is important. And you talk about the disruptors. BuzzFeed was a disruptor, Huffington Post was a disruptor, Netflix is a disruptor. You've got all these different disruptors who are shaking up the industry and are going in what is a sensible direction, because we need to galvanize those younger consumers to gravitate towards what we do. Because if we keep pushing them away, that's an entire generation of consumers that we will just lose, and we can't afford to lose them. We just can't.
So why do you think, I mean, we know this year there have been a series of kind of, problems, particularly with the newspaper industry. A particularly high profile one was earlier in the year when you said that you weren't prepared to go and host the Society of Editors awards, and there was a big kerfuffle. I think around 200 journalists wrote and said that the Society of Editors didn't represent them in some of the comments that they'd made. Do you want to tell us a bit about why you took that decision?
Well, I've been involved, just like you, and I've been involved with the Society of Editors for a while. And part of the reason for being involved with them is, I'm not someone that says things need to change without actively trying to do it, because what is the point? Me rocking up. Yes, I know that me doing the programs I do does have an impact, but that's not necessarily where the change happens. The change happens at a groundwork level. It's the stuff behind the scenes. When that stuff changes, then the whole thing changes really and becomes more representative. So I'd gotten involved with the Society of Editors to be a judge, to look at the way in which it can, fight for more fair representation across the board within the industry. And that was very specifically the reason why I started working with them. They approached me. I had done a panel, I think it was at Bloomberg, I'd done a panel, and we were talking about fair representation. It was after me doing that panel that they did ask me to get involved. And I was like, yeah, this is great. I've been to their events before. I had seen how white and male their events have been before. I had seen their nomination list before. And I thought, yes, no, rather than shattering this industry, you work with it, this organization, to elicit change. And then when they released that statement, I just thought, no, you can't ask me to get involved in something for a very specific reason and then choose publicly to erase that and say that everything is fine, when it is, I think, very well known amongst, I'd say, everybody that's on this call right now, that every single industry, every single British institution has had to look at the way that they behave, the way that they have pushed people out over generations and generations, and look better at how they can fairly represent Britain. I don't think there's a single industry that can sit back and say they have a perfect record, not one. So for one of our biggest institutions to say that, I thought, I can't be a part of this, because I practice what I preach and I work with organizations to improve what it is that they do. And that is something I'm very, very passionate about. And I'm not going to sit back and then do the awards. No, that's, my time is precious, and I will work with organizations that do actively and believe that they want to change and are actively trying to do that, and have actively got things in place to try and change things. I don't work with organizations that say one thing and do something completely different. My time is precious. I'm a mum of two kids with about 5 jobs. My life would be easier not trying to change things up and be a disruptor myself. But I was raised in an environment, and I was raised by parents who believe that you fight for what you believe in. That I don't know any different. So me doing what I do is an extension of how my parents have raised me.
No, well, it's impressive and well done. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that we're speaking just in the wake of this big scandal up in Yorkshire, and yet another kind of British institution which was so blind to what was going on internally.
You say blind, but then you have reports that showed that, as in my feet, that they called it banter, so they weren't blind to it. They knew certain behaviors were happening, but they chose to not see it within the seriousness that it needed to be seen.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean blind in that way. I meant more there are none so blind as those who do not wish to see. And just that sense of the tin ears of all those people who were in power. And we saw that with the man from the Football Association who went into Parliament and made a complete pig's ear of it. And we saw it with the Society of Editors. And at what point do you think that these organisations will actually be arrogant enough to stop? Well, how can we stop them being so arrogant that they go up and they talk about these things and they don't even realise that they're getting into hot water, or that there may be a problem here? I mean, that's what seems to me kind of incredible, that in the wake of Black Lives Matter and all sorts of different kinds of instances, these institutions go on making the same mistake. I mean, what's happening?
Well, it's like performative rage, isn't it? So, you know, after Black Lives Matter, and you have all these organizations that you know, are sort of saying, yes, you know, we support Black Lives Matter, we do this, we do that, and then you look on their Instagram page and the products that they're selling, and there isn't a single non-white person on their entire feed, and you know, and people being called to account and held up to account for that. And I think it's going to take, you know, we'd love to think that people, you know, won't keep making these mistakes when it comes to understanding what the right thing is to do. But I think what many organizations are realizing is that we live in a social media age. You say something that people feel are absolutely unbelievable and wrong, and within minutes you will be held up to account for that, held to account for that. There is, historically, it was probably easier to hide away. It's not so easy now. And that is a younger generation. You know, I sort of see it as, you know, my parents' generation, they strive for better, but didn't want to disrupt things because that isn't the way you did things, because you'd lose your jobs if you did that. You could not put food on the table if you did that. My parents worked 4 or 5 jobs between them to be able to raise me and my siblings in the way that they did. So in terms of being, they couldn't afford to disrupt things. They could try to do things to a certain extent, but they didn't have the luxury to be able to disrupt, because they would not be able to put food on the table. Then you've got the generation that comes after, where we're a little bit more vocal. We're perhaps working within, you know, the whole point of immigrants moving here is you move here and then they raise their children to have a better start in life than they have. So we then, I guess if we're talking about class, we then start our working lives at perhaps a different class from our parents. So the power that we have slightly different. The ramifications for speaking up could also be quite similar. You could lose your job, but you have to play the game in a slightly different way, but you do want to disrupt stuff, but not necessarily too much. Then you've got a younger generation, and I see that Hannah Ajala is logged into this. You have the younger generation who were just like, no, what's going on here? Not for me. And they will move on and they will create their own media empires. Jamal Edwards is a very good example of that. They will simply create their own media empires, do their own thing, and be highly successful whilst they do it. And we can't afford to keep losing that talent out of our industry. That is talent that knows how to make money. Money is what our industry needs in order to be able to survive. And I think it's that younger generation, the more of them that go, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. They will tweet about it. They will post on Instagram about it. They'll talk about it on TikTok. They will embarrass you. And you'll get to a point where British institutions cannot afford to continuously be embarrassed. They've just got to do the right thing.
Yeah, I hope so. I just think that that's quite a long time coming, isn't it? I think you're completely right that social media, for all the kind of its negative aspects, which we've heard about a lot recently, has actually been incredibly helpful in this respect, because I think that what's different now is that the newspapers, the broadcasters, are no longer the gatekeepers. You know, we rage against the fact that the news agenda is still so skewed, but you're right that your brother now can go and find his news elsewhere. Or when we were talking last week, you were saying that your parents look at the Jamaican and the Caribbean kind of media online.
Yeah, technology's changed so much. You know, my dad can be here and listening and watching the news in Jamaica. You know, he'll be sat in my house. And it is quite rude. He was sat in my house having lunch with the Jamaica radio on his phone, and he's eating his lunch and he's listening to Jamaican news. And I'm like, I've literally put the news on the telly, Dad. He's like, yeah, but it's the 1 o'clock news in Jamaica. I'm like, right, okay. Right. You know, he wants to listen, but he's able to do that now because of technology, and the way that we also view international stories. You know, if we're not doing it in the right way, people will gravitate towards others that perhaps doing it in a more balanced way, and perhaps a truer way, where the language is different as well. You know, I think that we do need to start, and I know people sort of talk about it as being like a woke agenda, and yet nobody can give me a definition of what woke agenda actually is. If woke agenda is that we have to be fairer to our, to the person sat next to us, fairer to society, then the way that's been skewed into being a bad thing is incredible on a PR sense, because being fairer to others within society is surely is what politics, for example, is supposed to be about. We're supposed to fight for fairer society. That's the point. And the way that that's been turned into a negative, you've got an entire generation who can see right through that. And again, we'll just go, nah, not interested in that. And they'll just move on elsewhere.
No, I think you're totally right. I really like the head teacher who wrote in The Guardian last week that we should be praising our children for being woke. They're standing up for the things that they believe in. And I thought that was right. And when I look at my teenage daughters, I think that they're much more forthright, that generation. And I suppose that every generation kind of moves it on in the same way that you're talking about being the child of refugees and how your parents were and how you are. And I think that what we're seeing in society is that younger generation absolutely voting with their feet, that they have other kinds of options. And we know that newspapers, particularly, their audience skews very old, very white, and often very male, actually, because they haven't even sorted out the kind of most basic bits of diversity, which, of course, women in journalism has been going on for ages. But I think that there's a real danger that the newspapers go into a real death spiral because they're not bringing in the younger readers that they need, and they're not adapting to the way that the world is going.
I think it's really, really dangerous situation that we're in, where there's a chance there's an entire generation that, from my perspective, coming from a broadcast journalism background, and our impartiality rules are different from newspapers. They are. I don't always think that a viewer gets that, but we have to be impartial. That's our job. If we are not impartial, we get fined, and those fines are heavy fines. They are a lot of money, and it's our job to give a balanced view of the world. It's a very dangerous, in my opinion, situation if you have if you have kids that are going to platforms that don't do impartiality, where perhaps they're not getting the full scope of a story, or where they're not able to get both sides of something and then make their own opinion about something, that is something for us to be so proud of, hugely proud of. And you see other countries where they don't have the same rules, and how polarized their society is as a result, and the way that they deal with stories, and the way that stories are sensationalized because they're under very different rules. I get it that there are different ways in which our rules perhaps could be a little bit more modern, but the fundamentals of our rules mean that people are able to look at stories and able to make their own minds up about particular stories, from my perspective, being in broadcast journalism. And I think it's very dangerous, I believe, if we have a generation that loses that. And it's my goodness, it was the same situation when I was at Radio 1 20 years ago. The way that Radio 1 Newsbeat was seen then was almost like a bit of a joke. It's news for young people. It's a bit of a joke. I mean, we would regularly get 4 or 5 million listeners for a joke, but we were providing a service to young people that they were not getting anywhere else. We were able to deal with, especially when I worked on One Extra News, we had a 2-hour news program that involved news, music, documentaries, interviews, all sorts. And you look, fast forward 20 years later, and suddenly you've got people that are scrambling over themselves trying to engage younger listeners, younger viewers, when 20 years ago, I was doing exactly that. But nobody took that seriously, because apparently young people aren't interested in news. Yeah, they are. Of course they're interested in news. Everybody's interested in news, but not everybody wants to consume it in exactly the same way. You've got to give people choices.
Yeah, and I think you also have to be aware that the people who are choosing the news agenda, all those kind of news editors and editors sitting in newspapers and all the rest of it, have to have a wider view about what news is, or they won't engage that younger demographic. I mean, that's what we're seeing with a younger, more diverse demographic of are not buying newspapers, not consuming news in that way, as you say, because they don't have to. But that is a risk. That is a kind of risk to the industry. And I know that broadcast journalism has a kind of impartiality kind of clause kind of in total, but we were talking last week about you saw some of the risks of some of the kind of dog whistle kind of politics and views that we're getting in some of our tabloids here, and the danger that they cause.
Well, yeah, I think it's knowing that actions have consequences, and the way that you talk about different sectors of society, if you continually talk about them in a very derogatory manner, that has real life consequences in real life on the streets of Britain. You know, you can see when you know, when you have anti-Muslim rhetoric in within our papers and our magazines, when you see that, there is a direct spike with attacks that you see on the street. You know, when the same works for anti-Semitism as well. You know, the same works for Black kids on the street. You know, there is a direct correlation. So words are powerful. Words, you know, words can cause some really negative consequences in real life situations. And I would not be comfortable with that myself as a journalist at all. You know, for me, that is not my job. My job is not to somehow make life worse for people whose voices are rarely listened to in the first place. And, you know, we kind of talk about, you know, dog whistle this, dog whistle that, but the reality of it is the real life consequences for real life people in every single aspect of their life, from accessing important services for their families, for you know, trying to earn money for their families, trying to get ahead, trying to afford to be able to put shoes on their kids' feet. All those sorts of things are impacted by the things that we read every day, by the things that we see every day. There are real life consequences in people's lives. And it's those lives of people that whose voices tend to be ignored, who aren't multi-millionaires. They tend to be, you know, on a class level, and we live in a very classist society, they tend to be those of a working class generation.
No, I think that's right. And we've got some interesting comments here on the chat. So as I put on my glasses, saying more young people are consuming political and news content on TikTok. I wonder what you think about that. I mean, are they going to be getting responsible journalism on there? I mean, there are kind of downsides as well to people getting. I mean, we've seen with things like kind of anti-vaxxing, or the kind of way that propaganda can spread on those kind of networks, where there isn't actually a kind of an editor or some fact checkers or people going, this isn't actually true. I mean, that's my concern about those alternative sources of news, that there is a kind of, as we know, there's an absolutely rigorous process about getting a story onto the air, or, you know, or in the old days, certainly into a kind of serious newspaper, that you had to be able to prove your facts were right and all of those kind of things. And I worry that some of the things that young people are consuming on TikTok and other social media are just simply not true.
Well, I mean, that's something that the platforms have to figure out for themselves, in terms of the fake news situations that we've been having for quite some time now on social media platforms. That is something that it's up to those platforms to be able to deal with. But in terms of young people consuming news on TikTok, well, then those news providers also need to be creating news services on those platforms as well. ITV News does stuff on TikTok, a very successful a very successful strand for young people on TikTok. They also do it on Instagram. It's a bit like, well, just because it's a new way of consuming content doesn't mean we can't also be there. We have a responsibility to be there. If young people aren't buying newspapers at their corner shop every day, well, where is it that they're consuming content? Well, then we have to figure out ways to also be on those contents and stop seeing news as being, you know, very button, you know, I go on the news wearing this, for instance, you know, with my yellow with my orange trousers. You know, I I do the news as me. I think the days of feeling like your news can only come with like a guy with a very perfect buttoned up suit
tie and a bow tie
and no, with the hair just so. And for goodness sake, look at these earrings. I wear these on news. You know,
Chevy McDonald would have been wearing those.
The days of thinking that news can only be consumed in one way are gone. You know, that just does not exist anymore. And I think giving people news in different ways, that is no bad thing at all. What I do on Loose every week, that's giving news in a slightly different way. That's all. And I think it's important that we stop thinking about these new platforms as being very anti-news. We also have a responsibility to be where the content is at and figure out ways to give young people news within those platforms.
No, that's a brilliant segue actually into the latest question on the chat, which just says you've talked a lot about present day journalism, but where would you like to see the future of the industry? So is that saying that ITN is already kind of slightly on TikTok? Do you think that all the kind of big news producers should be pumping stuff out onto those platforms for young people, or how would you like to see it work? And also, how do we fund it? Because of course that's one of the really crucial problems to the newspaper industry.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because if the industry hadn't been shutting out an entire demographic of people in the first place, them gravitating towards these platforms would have happened very organically. You know, they're all now rushing to do it. Well, shocker, if you'd opened up your doors and had a bit more of a diverse newsroom, that stuff would have been happening anyway. So actually they've had to learn I can say they've had to learn a very important lesson. They still haven't. You know, that they're now scrambling to try and do these things. And I think the future, in terms of the future of journalism, it's the understanding that journalism isn't just one thing. You know, I get asked quite a lot, was I afraid of doing Loose Women because it may well undermine the stuff that I do on the news? In my opinion, I'm still doing the news on Loose Women. It's just packaged in a slightly different way. And the idea, you know, we can all sit and, you know, imagine if we were all in person and we'd be having this Q&A and everyone be at the bar having drinks afterwards or what have you. And people, would be talking about this session.
That makes me feel a bit nostalgic for kind of, chat in person with drinks at the bar. We'll get back there.
Yes, they'd be talking about the session. They may also be talking about Frankie Bridge being on I'm a Celeb. They may also talk about Adele's performance on Sunday. It doesn't somehow make what we are and what we're doing. It isn't suddenly unintelligent. It's just us being well-rounded people. And I think the idea that you can only listen to the Today programme or watch Newsnight or Channel 4 News to actually be a serious journalist, those days are very quickly going. Yes, those platforms exist for those who are really interested in consuming it in that way, but that's not the only way to do it. And I think people have got to stop this thought process that news can only ever be one thing, and if we gravitate towards these new platforms that we're somehow diluting the news. We're not. We're just packaging it in different ways, and it's important that we continue to do that. We continue to, I quite like the Anderson Coopers of the world. I love Anderson Cooper on CNN. I've and when Soledad O'Brien was on CNN, for example, they're able to do the light and dark of news really well. And there has been an element of British broadcast news where we're quite afraid to do that because it means that we're diluting the brand. It's not diluting the brand, it's giving news in a slightly different way, and there is nothing wrong with that.
No, I completely agree. And I think that that's the only way that you actually make news more inclusive. I mean, what you seem to be talking about in a way is a kind of news snobbery. But actually, often I used to find that, say, the tabloid the tabloid kind of comment or leader on when I was a columnist, I used to find that actually the best and most intelligent digest of a complicated issue was often in a tabloid leader column, where in like 2 paragraphs they'd sum up absolutely what it was about. And I think that's really true, that often making things quite simple and digestible is the hardest thing of all. That it's in a way it's quite easy to have a kind of I was watching Newsnight last night. There were two politicians at two ends of the spectrum being completely, as you would predict, about the issue. And I actually turned it off. I just thought, I just don't want to listen to this. It's just much too boring. I know what they're going to say. And so I think you're right that we have to bring news in a way and in a kind of way which is digestible and made interesting for people, rather than making them see it like something which is homework.
Oh, I used to do pack, we would self-edit when we were in radio and doing Radio 1. All of our stories would come with music. So yeah. I started off editing news packages with music that would suit
shock horror.
And then it's like, oh no, but that can't be serious news. It's like, oh my God, we're literally telling the same story. Yeah. We're just doing it in two different ways. Yeah. And that is also reflective of the demographic of people we do have at the top of a lot of organizations, that the colleges that they've been to, the schools that they've been to, the whole sense of being as a result of going to these sorts of places means that tradition is important, and anything that comes outside of that tradition is seen as being unimportant. And yes,
or even more, or a threat. Or a threat, I think. And actually that's completely the wrong way of looking at it, because the point about news in a democracy is that we inform the greatest number of people so that they can make the decisions that are required, so we get the right kind of leaders and we hold our politicians and those in power to account. There's a really good quote here. It says, a question here, if you could have an Adele moment, is there anyone who has inspired you or kept you going during your career, other than Trevor McDonald, who we've already had?
Other than Trevor, and other than me bursting into tears when I met Maurice Stewart for the second time last week.
Oh wow, that's cool. That's really sweet.
Oh my God, I really embarrassed myself. Massively embarrassed.
Like, Moira, I just love you so much.
Yeah, I was like, I can't believe I've seen you. And I was like, you won't remember the first time I met you, but the first time I met you, I was like 22 and I couldn't even open my mouth. And you said, watch her. And like literally no sound came out of my mouth because I couldn't talk to her. And I saw her at the Ethnicity Awards last week, and she said to me how much she enjoyed my documentary, which is available on ITV Hub, and it's child, how much she enjoyed it, and she just said, and your mum would be so proud, and that was it. I was on the floor just in tears. She's just amazing. But in terms of sort of having an Adele moment, it would be my English teacher, same as Adele, Mrs. Broadbridge, sparked my love for writing. She also spotted my talent for performance, and it was her that spoke to my parents and said to them, they should nurture this talent that I have, and she's seen it in me in terms of performing, and they should try and nurture that. And that's how I ended up going to drama school, and I ended up getting a scholarship when my parents couldn't afford it anymore. But it was Mrs. Broadbridge that sparked my love for English, and that's where this all came back to. Yes, my dad reading the front of the Guardian newspaper, but also writing. I loved writing, and I would write poems and stuff, and my mum and dad would get me to perform it in front of their friends and things like that, because they were really supportive of my writing. And that came from her, and I will never ever forget her for that. And I bumped into her randomly. She knew someone that knew one of the lawyers here, and she came for a look around, and I was in, and I couldn't believe it was her, and she bought me a poetry book, which I obviously still have, and she was like, I am just so proud of you. And I was, oh my God. And I'm not a crier. You wouldn't think. I'm not really a crier, but there are particular people in my life that I am hugely thankful for, who have helped me on my journey to where I am today. And I will never ever forget that. The man that gave me my job here, Robin Elias, he saw something in me and gave me my first job here 15 years ago. He's the man that asked me to be on News at 10. There are so many, and the people that have helped me along the way, I will never ever ever forget, because yes, people only see me when they watch my programs, but there's like an army of people who have been an incredible support to me and have encouraged me and have lifted me up when I've doubted my own ability, and I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for them.
So So on that whole thing around kind of confidence, or how you kind of propel yourself forward, you come across as incredibly kind of self-confident and kind of sure of your kind of place in the world and how you got there.
Do you know
are there moments of great doubt in the life of Charlene?
Yeah, and that's why you have a girl tribe. You
Yeah.
have a good tribe of people behind you that when you are having a bit of a wobble, and when you're unsure of stuff, they will hold me up and they'll tell me when I'm wrong. And and my other half, Andy, does exactly the same thing. And one of my best mates, Jackie, and I remember being on a train when I was talking to her on the train, and I was going into Radio 1, and I turned on the news that morning, and there was a lady doing the job that I wanted to do. And I was complaining to her on the phone. I was like, I can't believe she's doing it. And blah, blah, blah. And it's like, this is what I want to do. And I was really frustrated. And this is going back to my early 20s. And she just said, Charlene, you need to use that energy and put it towards achieving what it is that you want to achieve. Don't sit there complaining about somebody else. You use that energy and you put it elsewhere, and it'll be far more useful to you. I'm like, yeah, but I know. No. There are no buts.
No, go and do something with it. I think that's
exactly.
I think that's really, really.
I've kept with that my entire career.
No, that's a fantastic thing. Now, I have to ask you, as the founder of a new platform for women in midlife, which is called Noon, I'm really interested in your grey streak in your hair, and I was going to say hooray for you for flying the flag for us.
You know what? It's not even on purpose. It's like me rocking my natural hair. None of it is ever done on purpose. I've got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old at home. I've got literally 5 jobs, and I haven't had time to go to the hairdresser in like 3 months to get it dyed. And I don't.
You should keep it. I think it looks fantastic.
Oh, I'm just a little bit like, I like it, but actually the rest of my hair is quite dry as a result of the greys in it. And when I do it keeps it a bit more moisturized. But I'm very honest about stuff. I don't mind rocking a grey streak. It doesn't somehow make me a less intelligent or less functioning presenter or journalist. So if I dye it, I dye it. If I don't, I don't. And I know that we've been through so many generations of women not being able to show their grey hair, generations of Black women not being able to have their natural hair. And I'm very much a person of, look, I'm just not going to stress myself about it. If it's grey till I get it dyed again, it's grey till I get it dyed again, and people are just going to have to just deal with it.
I love that. We've got one person here saying, how are you finding being a mum with your 5 jobs? How do you fit it all in?
It's co-parenting. It's having a partner who is incredibly proud of the work that I do. He also works full time, and I couldn't do it without him, really. And also having good family around us as well. But I don't know anything different other than having working parents. Both my parents worked, so I don't know what it's like to have a stay-at-home mum or a stay-at-home dad. My parents working was my daily reality. So I honestly don't know any different. I mean, I'm doing this on 2 hours sleep. I was, doing doing London. And I did Loose and the news today. Doing the news at 6 did wake me up, thankfully, so I was able to do this, but I will end up going home and absolutely collapsing and probably be in bed by 9:30 because I'm knackered. My 2-year-old was a nightmare sleeping last night. I didn't get home from work till midnight. So yeah, it's hard, but what it's like, you just keep on going, really.
Yeah, and also they're only little for a small amount of time, I would say.
Yeah,
my kids have now,
everyone's like, oh, wait till they're a teenager, you won't be able to get them out of bed. I'm like, do you know how far away that is? They're 2 and 4.
Yep, you've got a bit of a way to go. It goes on, what do they say? Small children, small problems. Big children, big problems. But it's different. They certainly give you a bit more time to kind of concentrate on your work. Oh, Charlene, I realise it's 8 o'clock. You've been a complete trooper. Thank you so much. I know that you must be exhausted, and we really, really appreciate you talking to us today, and you've been wonderfully forthright, and it's been a great conversation. So thank you so much on behalf of all of us.
Thank you to the whole Women in Journalism team for asking me to be a part of it, and thanks to everyone for logging on and listening.
Yay, everyone's saying, Alison says that was fantastic, Charlene. On 2 hours sleep, super amazing. I think we can all relate to that. So thank you so much. Go home, have some supper and get a good night's sleep. And thank you so much. They all think you're amazing, and we all do too. So thanks so much for doing it. We
Thanks,
appreciate
guys. Bye.
it.